Hello everyone and welcome to another big clash between the former and future world champion. Mikhail faces Garry Kasparov in the 1980 Soviet Team Championship. For Tal, it was also a way to prepare for his upcoming quarterfinal match for the candidates that he was about to play against Lev Polugaevsky. And also, just properly represent the team. The Soviet Championship was always a big deal, and it's a game that sort of signalizes the passing of the torch, as the title suggests, because they've played each other 2 times now. First time Tal faced Kasparov when Kasparov was 15, also in the Soviet Championship. Then when he was 16, both of those games were fairly quick draws. I think one was a 17-move draw, the other one a 21-move draw. And this is now the first decisive game that they've ever played. And let's check it out. It's quite interesting. Features a lot of theory even for that time. But yeah, Tal, the former world champion, and interestingly, you know who Tal faced for the World Chess Championship title, the great Mikhail Botvinnik, and he was he is sort of considered a tutor to Kasparov. As Kasparov, when he was 10, he attended the Mikhail Botvinnik chess school for gifted chess players, and he didn't get. We already discussed that he wasn't tutored one-on-one by Botvinnik, but he attended the school, and then he got very strong, and then he just continued. But yeah, interestingly, Kasparov chooses the Caro-Kann that Botvinnik also employed in his World Chess Championship match against Tal. So let's check it out. Tal with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to c6. Kasparov opts for the Caro-Kann defense. Knight to c3, and now pawn to d5. So a bit of a different move order, but after d4 and d captures on e4, we are in the standard Caro-Kann. If you're wondering why Tal is a little bit higher rated than Kasparov, Tal is over 2,700 here because Tal and Karpov were the only two over 2,700 players in 1980. The Karpov being the world champion and Tal, trying again to be the world champion as he's preparing for his match against Polugaevsky. And Kasparov, he was around world number 17 at the time, but everyone knew him, of course. He was a force to be reckoned with, and everyone knew that he was going places. So, okay, knight captures on e4. We have bishop to f5, attacking the knight, and knight back to g3. Attacking the bishop, bishop to g6, and pawn to h4. We have pawn to h6, and now knight to f3 first, knight to d7, and pawn to h5. Again, nothing new here, all been played before. This is the so-called Spassky variation of the Caro-Kann. Bishop to h7 and bishop to d3, attacking the bishop, and bishop captures on d3. It's pretty much in all of the lines of the Caro-Kann. When you have a light square bishop on this diagonal, white plays bishop d3, you're just gonna trade it right away. We have queen captures on d3, and queen to c7. And yeah, sorry about this short detour from the Nikšić tournament, but I really wanted to show this game while we're on the subject of Tal versus Kasparov. And bishop to d2. A pretty slow move, you might think, but it's the top move in the position. It's still the top move recommended by the engine, and the bishop is coming to this diagonal, to c3, and then we'll control some very nice squares. We have knight g to f6, queen back to e2. We have pawn to e6 and knight to e5. Castles is also played and was played also at the time. Tal wants to play a bit more active chess. Knight e5. We have c5, a very modern approach by Garry, and now knight captures on d7. Sometimes when c5 is played, you could also consolidate it with c3, but as you have plans of putting the bishop on c3, it doesn't really make sense. Knight captures on d7. We have queen captures and d captures on c5. We have bishop captures on c5 and Tal castles queenside. Now preparing some very nasty discoveries. Kasparov's queen is on d7, but Kasparov just moves it with tempo. Queen to a4, putting pressure on the a2 pawn. We have bishop to c3, sort of inviting the capture on a2, but that would be a big mistake. If you captured on a2, then queen b5 check, and you don't really have a good square for the king. You have to go to the dark squares, and then the bishop comes off with check as well. And after the king moves wherever you can even capture the knight, so to guard d8, so you don't have to worry about some queen a2 check followed by rook to d8. And once the bishop is captured, you can even play rook d7, and that's it. Black is completely out of this game. You don't care about rook a1 because the knight is guarding the rook, so this is perfectly fine. So after bishop to c3, rook to c8 by Kasparov, and now bishop captures on f6. eliminating the knight and opening up Kasparov's king. We have g captures, we have king to b1, now defending the a2 pawn, and also getting off of that c file. There is a game, even they're still following known theory from that time in 1969 during the Havana Olympiad, or it was some sort of the Claire Benedict Cup. It was played between Hans Re and Arturo Pomar Salamanca. We've covered one game by Arturo. It was Arturo versus Bobby Fischer, I think. And Bobby Fischer played a very, very nice game against him in the Benoni. Or no, Bobby Fischer played against him in the Havana. Yeah, Bobby Fischer played against Arturo Pomar Salamanca in the Havana Olympiad, and Hans Re played against him in the Claire Benedict Cup. And in that game, rook to g8 was played, which is also one of the top moves recommended by the engine. Also, one move that you can play is castles. This move has never been played before, and here Kasparov deviates with bishop to e7, and it is now, as of move 19, that this position has never been played before or after. So, it just deviates from this game, and no one ever reached the position after the game was played, even though it's a perfectly fine move. But yeah, the entire line is a little bit outdated for modern taste. We have rook to d3 by Tal, preparing to double up on the d file, and rook to g8. We have rook h to d1. Tal doubles up on the d file, and here Kasparov, I believe, knew exactly what he was doing. He gives Tal a deadly dare. He plays pawn to f5, and he says, "I know you want to capture it. I know you're the magician of Riga, the great pirate. There's no way you can resist capturing on f5." And it was exactly like that. Now, Tal could just play something like rook to d7, and the game continues. You don't really have a good way of playing this. Rook captures on b7 is coming. Also, now knight captures on f5 is a terrible threat, because if you recapture, queen captures on e7 is checkmate, and Kasparov would have to give up the queen for the two rooks, and okay, the game continues. Chances for both sides, it's a perfectly fine position, perhaps a little bit easier for white to play this, as the king is wide in the open. But no, Tal went for the immediate knight captures on f5, and now the question is, after, of course, e captures on e5, on f5, this is the only move that Kasparov can play. Otherwise, he's just, something like rook captures on g2. You can capture on e7, king captures, queen d2, and there's just not all that much you have here. So, of course, he captures right away. E captures on f5, and now Tal played rook to e1. And, of course, this is the position they both saw. The rook is coming to e1, then the other rook is coming to e3. Obviously, Kasparov will have a lot of problems along the e file. But it's a position where three moves come to mind. And obviously, you have to defend the bishop. So one is rook c7, the other one is queen b4 to defend the bishop, and the third one is queen to h4 to defend the bishop from h4. So those are the three options. We're gonna discuss, two briefly and one extensively. But what would you play here? What does your instinct tell you? Do you go rook c7, queen b4, or queen to h4? That is the question here. Even pause the video if you'd like. That's kind of how we do things here. So, of course, queen to b4 loses on the spot. I hope you did not choose that one, even though it seems like, the reasonable thing to do. You defend the bishop. You also are very, very close to the white king, which is always very good. The problem is there's this rook d4 move. And again, it doesn't look like much. You just move the queen, you defend the bishop, you're even putting some pressure on that c2 pawn. But now look at this, rook c4, and you're lost. The queen cannot keep an eye on the rook and on the bishop. So yeah, there's just no move here. You have to give up the queen, and then you're going to get checkmated, whatever you play. So, yeah, that would be pretty bad. Of course, Kasparov did not play queen to b4. Kasparov played queen to h4, which is also not great. Kasparov should just play rook to c7, and then after Tal triples up on d file, rook to e3, then go queen b4, and then queen b4 is fine when the rook moves from the d file. And okay, the game now continues. The king will probably unpin at some point with king to f8, and okay, the game will be played on. It's still very, very tactical, very dangerous, but this is the way to play for victory. Kasparov, on the other hand, played queen to h4, and you might think, okay, now Tal has him. He has him exactly where he wants him, but no, now Tal blunders. Tal just plays rook e3. He triples up on the e file, and he allows Kasparov a very, very nice defensive resource. I will show, however, the variation that Tal should have played. It doesn't win the game, but it makes things very complicated. He missed pawn to g3. And now, it doesn't matter where the queen moves, queen f6. Now you play queen to d2. And there's just not a lot you can do. If rook d7 is allowed, then it's game over for black. So how do you stop this? Of course, rook to c7 no longer works. Rook d8 is checkmate now, as the bishop on e7 is pinned. That's why queen to d2 also very powerful. You're going to have to play king to f8, and now Tal would have no other choice but to agree to a draw. Rook captures, and that's it. Queen captures on e7, queen captures on e6 check, and that's it. You cannot go to e8, as rook e3 will win the queen, so you're going to have to block, and then we're going to have a nice draw by repeating moves. So yeah, after this queen to h4 move, Tal had the opportunity of playing pawn to g3, but he just tripled up, and now there's no rook on the d file, so you no longer have to worry about any threats along the d file. Rook c7, Tal just Kasparov just defends, and not a lot now for Tal to do. g3 can now be played, but those tactics no longer exist. So Tal goes queen b5 check, king to f8, and now queen to e5. Okay, still looks very interesting. The rook is hanging, but it's very unclear what Tal had in mind if Kasparov just plays rook d7. There's just no move that he can play. Queen b8, rook d8 doesn't really do all that much. Any other move, let's say pawn to g3 now, queen to b4, and now if queen captures on h5, on f5, it's probably maybe something like this, but then just queen g4. And because Tal would have to trade queens, otherwise he's getting checkmated on d1. So yeah, it's very, very tactical. I imagine both were low on time, as we have no access to those to that kind of information. But Kasparov did not do that. He played pawn to f4. He went for the counter, rook e4, pinning the f pawn, and now just rook to c5. Here, rook d7 is the way to go. With rook d7, you're winning, and there's nothing Tal can do. But now, after rook to c5, Tal is back in the game. He just goes for the end game. Queen captures on e7 check, queen captures on e7, rook captures, and the rook captures on g2. And now we again have a position where you can just continue playing the end game because the position is perfectly fine, or you blunder. So what would you play here? You've just you got out of that entire mess, and now you have a chance to regain balance, to get back into the game. How would you continue this game? Of course, not by capturing a pawn. This is what Tal played. You have to play f3. And it looks a little bit dangerous because now black can just start the capture on c2, and then, of course, b2 becomes weak. But you don't really worry rook c captures on c2, because once you capture on b7, this pawn is defended, so it's not a problem. So rook g captures on c2 could be a bit more dangerous, but still rook captures on b7. Now, not a lot to do. If rook f2 going after the pawn, now you just capture on a7, and then if rook captures on f3, you can already start pushing b4, and no problems for you there. But okay, after rook captures on g2, Tal played rook captures on b7. Now Kasparov played rook captures on f2, and now a4. But now the problem is, after pawn to f3, you don't really have the option of playing pawn to b4, because now if you play pawn to b4, then rook c captures on c2, and this rook can no longer help out with the defense of the king. Whatever you play, let's say rook captures on a7, rook b2 check, king to a1, rook a2 check, king to b1, and now rook f to b2 check, king to c1, pawn to f2, rook to f1, and now just rook captures on b4, and there is no defense against rook to a1. This rook will be lost, and that's all there is to it. So after f3, Tal realized, okay, I might have messed up a little bit here, plays rook to e4. Kasparov now plays, well, I could tell you what Kasparov played, but again, even better, as it's the only move that wins the game. Feel free to pause the video while I give you a couple of seconds. Of course, it has nothing to do with this rook. I just highlighted it to confuse you. It's actually rook to f5. And it's the oldest sort of chess idea in the book. The rooks belong behind passed pawns. If you play any other move and allow this rook to come to f4, then you're no longer going to be able to push it. So, of course, rook to f5. But Tal also knows about this. He also knows that rooks belong behind passed pawns, and he will not allow it. He plays rook to b5, forces the rook away. But now Kasparov captures, and after a captures on b5, we have rook to e2. This allows the pawn to come to f2. Rook f4. Now Tal gets his rook behind the passed pawn, pawn, pawn to f2, now threatening rook e1 check, and then the pawn can promote. So of course Tal will move the king, so now rook e1 does not come with check, but now Kasparov gobbles up the c pawn. And here, this is still very much a fight, but if played well, Black does have a winning position. Tal plays king b3, we have rook to e2, king to c3, and now king e7. Both of them, of course, have to bring the king into the game, and pawn to b4. Usually a winning move. Unfortunately for Tal, here it is not. We have king to e6, king to d3, and here Kasparov just played rook to b2, or rook to a2. Those are the only two winning moves, but not ones you can easily miss. And he was in this position on move 40 that former world champion Mikhail Tal resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. And the reason for that is that, okay, we can just show it. Let's say king c3, you're just trying to harass the rook, and then if the rook moves, you're going to gobble up the f2 pawn. The problem is that after rook a2 and king to d4, or you go king b3, then the rook escapes all the way to e2. But if you now go, let's say king d4, well, let's say pawn to f5, and let's say king c5, it seems like, how is Black to make progress here? Aren't we just doing well? b6 is coming and everything. Well, no, king e5 attacks the rook, and now you either move the rook and then this pawn promotes, or you move it to f3 to sort of keep an eye on the f1 square. But now, I know you see it, it's checkmate in 2. Of course, you see it, rook c2 check, and the king has nowhere to go. Look at this. Completely boxed in within the pawn, the king, and its own pawns. The b pawn, the pawn that was pushed to b4, concluding your day and your life, because now you have to give up the rook and it's checkmate. So, very, very tough game. Tal couldn't resist, because, like I said, Kasparov knew exactly what he was doing when he played this pawn to f5. He knew who he was playing against, and he knew that Tal will not be able to resist. And even with this, you see that Kasparov couldn't calculate everything. Could have gone either way, but yeah, Tal messed up. He didn't mess up once. He messed up 3 times, and then after that, missing the end game, it was enough for 17-year-old Kasparov to win the game. But yeah, here very, very strange to see Kasparov at 25.95, because we are so used to seeing him as a 2800 player. But yeah, he also had to start somewhere, and yeah, this is where he started. Sort of a moment, like I said, the passing of the torch. First time to defeat the former world champion, and will of course become a world champion himself in a few years. But we're gonna get to that as we are about to return to the Nikšić tournament, and then we're gonna discuss everything that happened afterwards. Before I started the next big saga, as it is coming. No worries there. You know that the Steinitz saga is coming. So yeah, really hope you enjoyed that, and also I will share one nice variation regarding the Caro-Kann, as we've already checked out the Caro-Kann. As you know, a couple of days ago, I've officially partnered up with LotusChess, and I've been trying it out ever since. And it's just very, very helpful. And here I'm going to give you a line that you can use to crush your opponents. I used it right before I made this video. You can check on LotusChess. I defeated a 2500 player, basically with a very, very simple opening idea in the Caro-Kann. It was a bullet game, but yeah, still, it was played well. But the idea is that after pawn to e4, and let's say your opponent plays c6, which is the Caro-Kann, let's say d4, d5, I was always a knight to c3 player. But now I decided to give pawn to e5 a chance. I never liked it for some reason. Like I said, I always preferred knight c3. But the idea is that after bishop to f5 and h4, your opponents might play pawn to h5, and then the game just continues with bishop to d3. But sometimes your opponents will play pawn to h6, which allows you, it's not a mistake or anything, it's a perfectly fine move, but it allows you to play incredibly creative against the Caro-Kann. You can play pawn to g4, and after bishop to h7, or they come to e4, and then you first play f3, and then they go to h7, and now you play e6. And all of a sudden, if your opponent doesn't know what he's doing, he's going to get crushed pretty much instantly. This is already much better for white, but for example, captures, you're going to play bishop to d3, and now more often than not, the players with the black pieces just capture on d3, because it's the most natural move to do, for a Caro-Kann player. When white plays bishop d3, you trade on d3. And here, as happened in my game against my, well, he wasn't 2500, he was like 2486. you're already lost here. In the game, my opponent played knight to f6, which is also perfectly, fine if you want to lose. And it seems like your g4 pawn is hanging, but just knight f3, and that's it. Now, there's probably the idea is that if queen to g6, he was planning to run away, but now the knight coming to e5 will take away d7 and f7, and not much for you to do here. Yeah, especially now, if you start running away with king to d7, then you can go knight e5 check, and wherever the king goes, knight f5 forks the king and the queen. In the game, my opponent went king to f7, and then you can also play a lot of moves like knight e5 check, king to g8. You can go knight to d2 before going after the rook, because black really has nothing to do here. The bishop, the queen is completely boxed in. For example, let's say knight d7, you're going to go knight g6. Rook h7, you can even play queen h3 now with the threat of g5 and just captures on e6, and that's all there is to it. So you can use it to crush your opponent many different ways, but yeah, it's a fairly simple idea. Once if your opponent doesn't go for h5, just h6, g4, and very, very easy to remember. You can crush many opponents like this. They will struggle. And yeah, like I said, if you still haven't tried it out, first link in the description below. It's an app that taught me this variation. It really teaches you fighting chess. It teaches you how to give up a little bit of material to get playable positions like these. So try it out. If you still haven't, I'm enjoying it immensely, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Christian Medical and Professional Services, Peter Albert, Rajesh Kota, Phil Bauer, and Fisher Exteriors for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day, probably returning to the next tournament in the next video. See you soon.